Germany, spring 1945. The war was collapsing inward on itself. Across the Rhine and into Saxony, Allied forces advanced through regions already destabilized by years of bombing, shifting front lines, and civilian displacement. Entire cities sat on the edge of structural failure. Meteorologists had warned of unusual conditions that week: low humidity, high-pressure stagnation, and strong thermal inversions trapping heat close to the ground. Military engineers knew what that meant. When incendiary bombing ignited urban cores under these conditions, fires didn't spread outward. They collapsed inward, merging into something far more dangerous: a firestorm. Temperatures could exceed 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds generated by the heat reached 80 miles per hour, pulling people off their feet. One U.S. Army report would later state, once ignition thresholds were crossed, the environment became self-sustaining. But deep inside a walled labor compound officially designated a prisoner holding site, no one had planned for this. And what came next shocked everyone. At 21:17 hours, Allied aircraft released their final wave. Incendiary clusters struck the industrial district less than 900 meters from the compound. Thermal cameras, primitive by modern standards, registered a sudden spike. On the ground, soldiers felt it first as a pressure wave, not an explosion. Windows bowed inward. Stone cracked. Metal fixtures began to vibrate. In scientific terms, the city crossed a critical combustion threshold, where radiant heat ignites structures without direct flame contact. Engineers compared it to a volcanic dome reaching overpressure. Fire behavior units noted the same warning signs volcanologists watch for: rapid energy release, inward airflow, and atmospheric column formation. A plume of superheated smoke rose more than 5,000 feet, visible from 30 kilometers away. And then, the compound's outer wall began to fracture. Panic moved faster than fire. Women inside the compound, many forced laborious. Others political detainees, screamed as smoke flooded corridors. The guards had fled minutes earlier. Outside, U.S. infantry units advancing through the district received conflicting orders. The radios crackled. Then the alarms went silent. Firestorms distort sound. They collapse communication lines. They create wind so violent it reverses evacuation routes. Rescue teams froze. Engineers warned the buildings were entering progressive structural failure. Load-bearing walls weakening from thermal expansion. Residents had only minutes to react. A U.S. lieutenant later recalled, the air itself was moving like a living thing. Soldiers used rifle butts to smash padlocks already glowing red-hot. One man collapsed from heat exhaustion. Another was dragged back by his webbing. Above them, the firestorm intensified, feeding itself. No one had trained for this. Even as the rescue unfolded, military scientists and engineers argued, was this a classic firestorm or something worse? Recon aircraft captured infrared imagery showing unexpected heat pockets forming beneath intact rooftops. Structures that should have burned slowly were erupting violently. Some experts proposed a subsurface oxygen draw, caused by damaged sewer systems funneling air directly into the blaze. Others pointed to unexploded ordnance igniting in sequence, creating a chain reaction similar to fault slippage along a hidden fracture. This changed everything. Fire behavior models used since Hamburg in 1943 no longer applied. No model had predicted this scenario. Commanders faced an impossible choice: pull out and let the compound burn, or push deeper into an environment exceeding human tolerance limits. They chose to go in. At 22:04 hours, the firestorm surged. A secondary ignition zone opened less than 300 meters away. A sudden blowtorch of flame racing through a warehouse filled with industrial solvents. The resulting thermal shockwave slammed into the compound. Roofs collapsed. Walls failed. Inside, soldiers found women trapped behind fallen beams. Their skin blistered from radiant heat alone. This wasn't just fire. It was a self-amplifying thermal system, similar to how a new volcanic fissure opens when pressure finds a weakness. The science was brutal but simple. The heat had created its own weather. Oxygen rushed inward. Flames followed. Every 10 seconds, the conditions worsened. Yet soldiers kept moving. They formed human chains. They carried the unconscious. They dragged the injured through smoke so thick it erased depth perception. One rescuer would later say, I couldn't see my own hands. I just followed the screaming. By dawn, the firestorm burned itself out. The city lay under a blanket of ash and collapsed masonry. More than 70% of structures in the district were destroyed or uninhabitable. Airfields closed. Rail lines melted. Thousands were displaced. But outside the compound, survivors sat wrapped in military blankets, coughing, crying, alive. Medical teams treated burns, smoke inhalation, and shock. Water trucks soaked still smoldering ruins. An after-action report would later confirm. Over 300 women were pulled from the compound before total collapse. No headlines followed. The war moved on. But for those who walked out of the fire that night, history split into before and after. Firestorms don't leave warning sirens. They don't respect uniforms, walls, or treaties. They form when pressure, heat, and human decisions collide. And even now, scientists study those nights, because the conditions that created them still exist. The Earth remembers. The atmosphere remembers. And somewhere, the next threshold is already forming.